Jimmy Butler's story doesn't begin on a basketball court. It begins in silence, in places where the world forgets people. And that silence, it followed him everywhere. Not as weakness, but as fuel. The kind of fuel that turns pain into identity and identity into something unstoppable. Jimmy Butler didn't become Jimmy Butler because the league believed in him. He became Jimmy Butler because he learned how to live when everything around him tried to break him. His greatness isn't loud, it's carved. Carved from nights with no certainty. Carved from days where survival was the only goal. Carved from moments where quitting would have been easier, but quitting wasn't in him. When he entered Chicago, he wasn't a headline. He wasn't the chosen one. He wasn't even on most people's radar. He was a quiet rookie, a defensive project, a long shot in every sense. And while the world barely noticed him, Jimmy noticed everything: the footwork, the screens, the timing, the discipline. He studied veterans the way some people study survival manuals, because for him, basketball was survival. And slowly, painfully slowly, the transformation began. One year, he learned how to guard anyone. The next year, he learned how to score. Then he learned how to lead, not with comfort, but with truth. Sometimes harsh, sometimes heavy, but always real. But Jimmy Butler's rise was never built on harmony. His standards were too high for comfort. He demanded more work, more hunger, more responsibility than most locker rooms wanted to give. And every time he raised the standard, something cracked. Chicago cracked. Minnesota cracked. Philadelphia cracked. But Jimmy didn't break. He just kept moving. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth. He wasn't meant to fit everywhere. He was meant to fit in one place: Miami. The moment he stepped into Miami, his fire met its match. A franchise that didn't fear intensity, a culture that didn't protect comfort, a team that didn't hide from accountability. The Heat didn't just accept Jimmy, they reflected him. And Jimmy gave them everything he had. The bubble wasn't a fluke. It was destiny meeting discipline. When the world stopped, when crowds vanished, when everything became quiet again, Jimmy thrived in the silence he came from. He carried Miami through exhaustion, injury, doubt, and pressure. Triple doubles with his body breaking. Mid-range daggers with his legs gone. Moments where he didn't just play basketball. He dragged a team through fire with him. He didn't scream. He didn't celebrate. He didn't ask for credit. He just kept going, because keeping going is all he's ever known. But the legend of Jimmy Butler didn't end in the bubble. It grew, it sharpened, it hardened. Milwaukee felt it. Boston felt it. Every team in the East felt it. Jimmy Butler became that one name nobody wanted to hear in April. The season belonged to stars, but the postseason belonged to survivors. And Jimmy Butler is a survivor first. Years passed, the explosiveness faded, but the mind, the craft, the discipline, those didn't fade. They got crueler, sharper, scarier. Jimmy didn't need speed. He used timing. He didn't need athleticism. He used angles. He didn't need highlight rolls. He used pain. His game slowed, but his control grew heavier. He played like he was negotiating with the game itself and winning every negotiation. And as Miami rode through injuries, breakdowns, and storms, Jimmy kept steadying the ship with the same cold calm that kept him alive long before the NBA ever knew his name. Jimmy Butler's second chapter doesn't begin with a moment of triumph. It begins in the kind of quiet most players fear. The quiet that follows after critics say you're aging, after fans say your window is closing, after the league starts talking about new faces and new eras, as if the older ones should quietly step aside. But Jimmy Butler never belonged to eras. He belonged to fights. He belonged to pressure. He belonged to the long, uncomfortable stretches of a season where some players fold from fatigue, where locker rooms fracture from frustration, where belief gets thinner and thinner until only the stubborn ones remain standing. And Jimmy was always stubborn enough to stay. Part 2 begins in that place, the place where younger stars rise, systems change, and older bodies start negotiating every collision. Most players ease their way through these years. Jimmy didn't. He leaned into them, because for him, the second chapter wasn't decline, it was duty. He wasn't chasing greatness anymore. He was protecting it. Night by night, he played with a kind of emotional clarity that only comes from living through things harsher than anything basketball could offer. Crowds booing, pressure building, criticism rising, those were nothing to him. Noise couldn't shake someone who grew up inside storms. Jimmy embraced every minute with the same quiet resolve he once used to climb out of impossible circumstances as a teenager. He arrived earlier. He trained smarter. He listened more. He cut out everything that didn't matter. Because the thing Jimmy understood, the thing no one else saw, was that the second phase of a career isn't about explosiveness. It's about efficiency. It's about intelligence. It's about turning every ounce of experience into a weapon sharper than any first step or highlight dunk. And that's exactly what he did. He started manipulating defenders with angles instead of speed. He used his shoulder like a crowbar, nudging defenders out of position by inches that turned into advantages. He leaned into contact with a calm, heavy acceptance, and then slipped away from it with footwork tighter than it had ever been. He slowed down, just enough to make defenders lean, and then punished them. He lived in the mid-range, not because he had to, but because he mastered every inch of it. He no longer hunted fouls. He invited them, controlled them, choreographed them. Jimmy Butler didn't lose athleticism. He traded it in for control. And Miami felt the shift immediately. In practices, players said he spoke less but meant more. A single sentence from him carried the weight of an entire meeting. A single stare from him could reset the discipline of an entire drill. A single timeout moment, him breathing slow, eyes steady, hands on his knees, could settle the chaos around him like gravity returning to a drifting object. He didn't need to yell anymore. He didn't need to prove anything. His poise was proof. But the real evolution, the real terrifying part, happened behind closed doors. In film rooms, in weight rooms, in back corridors of empty arenas after losses. While others showered and left, Jimmy stayed behind with chart sheets, sequences, tendencies, counters. He studied his defenders, not their strengths, their patterns. When they blinked, when they reached, when they hesitated. When they tried to anticipate his pivot, he built an internal map of every player who guarded him consistently, their habits, their rhythms, their impulses. And then he struck at those exact moments. Jimmy stopped playing the game everyone else was playing. He started playing the game inside the game. And that's when the Heat began to look different. The ball moved cleaner. The defense rotated faster. The young guys played with sharper instincts. Veterans trusted the system more. The locker room wasn't chaotic. It was structured, focused, anchored by a man who refused to let his fire dim. The league noticed it first in the close games. Games where Miami trailed by 8 with 5 minutes left. Most teams panic, but not Miami, not with Jimmy. He didn't speed up. He slowed down the entire arena. Every possession became a meditation, a quiet conversation between him and the defender, a negotiation he always won. A jab step, a shoulder dip, a bump, a retreat dribble, a mid-range dagger, then a steal, then 2 free throws. Then a stare that wasn't arrogance. It was calm, chilling defiance. Jimmy wasn't trying to take the soul of teams. He just did. There was one night deep in this chapter of his career, a road game, hostile crowd, a playoff atmosphere in the middle of the regular season, where Miami stumbled into the fourth quarter down 17. Most viewers turned their TVs off, but the Heat bench wasn't nervous. Because Jimmy wasn't nervous. He walked into the quarter with the same slow, measured cadence of a man walking into work. He didn't rush a single possession. He didn't hunt stats. He didn't try to take over with chaos. He took over with precision. He carved them apart possession by possession, play by play, decision by decision. A post fade, a steal on the baseline, a fast break layup, a kick out 3, another mid-range, a stop, a foul drawn, 2 free throws, another stop. A jumper so calm the crowd grew silent even before the shot dropped. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture to the crowd. He didn't celebrate. He just walked back on defense in the same slow, unbothered rhythm he always had, because the storm outside never matched the storm inside him. Jimmy Butler's late career evolution turned him into something different from a star. He became a stabilizer, a closer, a tone setter, a living example of the power of discipline. And the Heat needed that more than anything. Their roster changed. Players came. Players left. Systems evolved. But Jimmy remained. The quiet furnace in the middle of everything. Players didn't just play with him. They played for him. Because Jimmy never asked for respect. He commanded it. He didn't need cameras. He didn't need narratives. He didn't need validation. He worked. He led. He showed up every night with scars instead of excuses. The league kept waiting for the drop-off, for the chapter where Jimmy slowed too much, for his body to fail, for the fire to dim, for the identity to fade. But instead, he just kept refining his craft, refining his pace, refining his impact, refining the version of himself that every young player quietly wished they had the discipline to become. Jimmy Butler didn't enter the NBA to entertain. He entered it to outlast, to outfight, to outwork, to outgrow. And in this second chapter of his journey, he didn't just survive the league,